And then I was at General Electric prior to that in aerospace engineering throughout my whole career. So I'm excited to be a part of this panel. I think it'll be an exciting conversation, and I will pass it on to Laura.
Thank you so much, Georgette. I'm Laura Kiernan. I'm the CEO and founder of High Touch Investor Relations. I founded my company 2.5 years ago after being in corporate America for about 30 years. I have 20 years of experience in investor relations, working for very medium to large public companies such as Revlon, Playtex Products, WWE, Harry Winston, Ubiquity Inc., and Philip Morris. I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be invited and to also participate with these other amazing women. And so that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to pass it on to Stacy.
Thank you, Laura. And I am Stacy Belf. I am honored to be on this panel, given obviously the caliber of my co-panelists, and I was really appreciated being asked to join. I work for State Street Bank. I'm in their Alpha division, which is their tech solutions division of the bank, and I would argue the strategy and future of the firm, but we can share about that as we talk about some of our challenges of being out of the office. This is my third career. My first was in global telecom, and I did that for several years. And I ended up being a lawyer, litigator, and federal prosecutor. And then in 2015, I made the pivot to this career in State Street. For them now, I'm the CAO for them, which means for that division of the bank, I'm responsible for a lot of the management of our operations. So it can be our facilities, our real estate, our personnel, budgeting, funding, resourcing, finance, all of those kind of just running the day-to-day aspects of the business in a lot of ways. And so it's been really an interesting time to be doing that through COVID, which I'm sure to talk about, but fantastic opportunity to learn an entirely new working environment. So, but thank you for asking me.
Wonderful. Once again, Georgette, Stacy, and Laura, thanks so much for being here with us today. So just to dive into the questions. So first, there are polarizing views on the permanence of work from home culture, and prominent figures such as Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and the management teams of Spotify and Salesforce have made work from home permanent for many, calling this the shift to the future of work. On the other hand, David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, labeled this change as an aberration rather than the new normal. So what are your views on this change, and what do you believe is this so-called future of work?
I mean, it's a very good question, I can tell you from experiences and from a lot of reading on McKinsey reports and Gartner reports and things like that, that I think it's going to depend on the culture of the firm and the proximity and closeness of people of the firm. And you'll find that when there are organizations where people work very closely together, that they will post, this pandemic, go more into more of a hybrid solution of how they're going to do things, or as Twitter and others have done, may say you're going to fully work from home. But if they were already organizations that didn't have that type of proximity, then they will tend to probably work as they always did. What I'm finding in a lot of the companies that I deal with Carlyle and portfolio companies that Carlyle owns, or the boards that I sit on, that a lot of the CEOs feel like there's a culture piece that they're trying to figure out how to continue to maintain with this remote from home, but still give the flexibility that people need. So I think it's going to be more of a hybrid as we go, more into the future. And will we ever have that full kind of back in the office, everyone together at the water cooler? I think the mindset has changed, and I think that we've proven productivity in a different way, and so we're not really going to see that ongoing, in the future. But I'd be interested in what my panelists also think.
I think Jed is right in so many ways, especially about that the hybrid becomes the new normal. In my view, it is absolutely fundamentally changed. Nobody can argue that. Why do I say it? Because the default has changed. It used to be the default was you came to the office. Now that default isn't there anymore. And frankly, I think that's a challenge to the participants in your group. You need to be good consumers. That should be one of the questions you're asking during a job interview. I, a few years ago, turned down a job offer because they would only have a desk for me in the office 2 days of the 5 days of the week. And I felt for me and my career and my development, it was very important. And especially if people are starting their careers, they really need to pay some premium on that. How am I going to get those developing relationships if it's remote? So I'm a little off track, but where it comes from is I think that default has changed. And so I think that the companies are now going to have to put it in a balancing. As Georgette alluded to, the culture aspect of it, if I'm a CEO, I now need to say to my stakeholders, okay, here's an opportunity to save a tremendous amount of expense. I'm going to have to justify to you that that expense is worthwhile by either cultural or productivity gains. And I think they're going to be very hard pressed to make that argument with a full in-person office environment 5 days a week. I think you'll more likely see that they can get the trade-offs of culture and productivity with a couple of few days a week, and people will now split their time more. But now, in my mind, it has fundamentally changed. Great on the numbers. Companies have now found a way to transfer their operating costs to their employees by having us provide our own working environment, and they're going to have to justify the company taking those costs back. And to do so, they'll have to claim that there's productivity and cultural gains that outweigh it. So I think Georgette's 100% right. Hybrid is the way, but it's changed no matter what because it's no longer a default.
Yes, and I would agree with both of those as well. I have noticed in investor relations in particular, we work with both public and private companies, and most of our job is meeting with investors. And it used to be that we would have to travel city to city, country to country. They want to see the whites of your eyes when you're asking people for millions of dollars. But what we've seen in this environment is that capital is still flowing pretty freely. And we've been successfully able to raise money in this environment. So that's going to be a huge change in terms of travel. I would say we've become hyper efficient in terms of being able to get our clients in front of more investors more often, which really facilitates, the movement of capital for our clients. And we're not restricted to any geography either. I mean, we're working with an African client and we're meeting with investors in Norway and Paris and New York. And it's just, if we would have had to do that in person, I don't know how we could have, or, it just wouldn't have been nearly as feasible. So for us, I think it's definitely changed permanently. I do miss working in the office, but it's hard for me to think of even justifying the time to get to and from the office because I own the business, the money to pay for my lease. And, so I'm more like my employees now are fronting the expense for their office space. And then also training and development. I did hire a recent grad 2.5 years ago. And we've definitely had to juggle things around to try to figure out, well, I can't be just beside him in the office. So how can I best train and manage him? And so that's been kind of a challenge for me too. But I think it's positive. We'll be moving to a hybrid too, but it's probably just more work from wherever you are. And it allows me to expand my business far more globally than it was before.
I think Laura brings up a good point about the travel. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, it's going to bounce back, and my personal viewpoint, I don't think it's going to bounce back that way. I think it will come back some, but if you think about the savings that the companies are getting, especially if we think about as we're moving more into the ESG world and the carbon reduction, goals that are being met now because people aren't traveling as much. And the cut down of, just the construction of new buildings and things like that, so there's a lot to be said the pandemic was horrible, but there's a lot of good that has kind of come out of this that expedited technology in ways that we never thought, that we would actually get there this so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your insights are all really like something that brings up like a new perspective, and especially like everything going on with like the hybrid model and like technology making everything more efficient. That's something that has definitely like sped up so many processes that we're going to see lasting into our future. So I think that'll be something that's really impactful. And then just moving on. So, what are some pandemic impacts on businesses and trends that you find particularly interesting? And how have these trends affected your respective firms that you work at? So State Street, the Carlyle Group, and High Tech Investor Relations.
And by the way, I should say, like, I speak for me, I don't speak for State Street. I have collective experience. I should be careful that, none of what I say can be taken as State Street's official position. But for three things that surprised me that came out of this, one was the ways in which it strengthened client relationships. Ones that we'd always had as clients that all of a sudden saw us as an incredibly invaluable partner because we kept running, especially through, for us, a very volatile trading period in the market. And the fact that we never lost a step, never blinked, and had such fantastic continuity, we became essential to them. So, it developed client relationships in deeper ways and is leading to new opportunities as a result, where clients who didn't have that kind of stability in a really volatile time value it. So I actually think that there's an increased sales opportunity, that can arise from these things. The second for me was, we were doing really well in the data to watch what was happening in the day-to-day. And as part of my work, I built out a lot of reporting and business management data watching, and we just pulled immediately dashboards. And our numbers for installations went up, our client support calls went down, exact opposite of what everyone would have thought. Because clients didn't have time to call us about the littlest, silliest thing. They only called us when it really mattered. Our implementations, the hours went up because people were able to do things remotely. So it's just having the data really showed you that things didn't play out a lot of times the way people thought they would, as we were all quickly pivoting on a dime into a remote work environment during real market volatility. And then the third was, and then I'll pass to my panelists, but the third was that changes, resiliency became something as a sale point versus a cost of doing business. I'm a highly regulated industry in State Street. Our resiliency, our continuity of operations is heavily regulated. That was always, I think, seen by a lot as, obviously something you do, but the more you put into it, it could just be a cost of doing business. You didn't always know the return on the investment. Now that's a total pitch point. Clients want to know how you're doing in the resiliency and continuity of operations space. So it transformed it into something that it's always been incredibly important, but now clients are valuing it and willing to make that a part of the premium.
So I think Stacy makes a very good point around strengthening of client relationships. And like Stacy, I speak for myself. I'm not speaking for Carlyle or Aflac or Jacobs or the firms that I support. But I think another one that I saw clearly. I mean, I've always been a strong person around diversification from being in the finance industry. But watching Carlyle with respect to diversification, which it's a good thing that they cross so many industries, because you saw some companies like United Road Services that, okay, we don't need to ship cars like during the middle of this pandemic. So you're trying to figure out how to keep those companies alive, where you saw things like Thomas Scientific, which is a distribution of medical devices, like that company just flourished, during the pandemic. So diversification, companies that had true diversification did very well through the pandemic. And so that was a very good thing to see. One thing that, and it'd be interesting what Stacy and Laura also think about this one, that we saw a lot across the portfolio companies at Carlyle and across the boards I support, that the cyber attacks and ransomware just increased during the pandemic. So like the attackers just kind of came out more. So that was one thing where we were spending a lot of time of trying to ensure that the infrastructure of companies, that they had a good, strong infrastructure in place as we tried to ensure that they had the growth to maintain and kind of keep going forward. So that was more of a negative item that we saw in the pandemic, but it's become a positive because these companies are a lot stronger now from the infrastructures that they put in place going forward.
Sorry, my mute was on. Some of the trends that I've been seeing is, like I started to allude to, which is this hyper efficiency of capital movement. And part of that has been facilitated by really low interest rates, but it's also just been, I think, this work from home environment where, working 10 straight hours in a row kind of thing. There are there's no time for breaks. There's no, lunches, there are no dinners, there are none of these things. So I would say there's been a significant hyper efficiency of capital. I've also seen a lot of new businesses. I mean, for me, it's been fascinating because I worked with this one founder who came to me, for example. He ran a chess, an after-school chess program, and his business basically shut down in March. And he had to very quickly pivot, and he started an online gaming company, which now he wasn't just localized to the New York, educational market. He was actually able to expand globally to every time zone, every geography, every age group, and so suddenly his mind just, expanded to think of, wow, how can I pivot my business to survive? But his business went from like making a couple of $1 million a year to making, $10 million a year. So that was one of the trends that I've seen, is a lot of really innovative and interesting businesses. And also, I want to acknowledge it's been wonderful from a family perspective for me. I know it's been hard for so many people, but we used to have dinner 2 to 3 nights a week together, and now we have dinner 7 nights a week together. And that has really changed the dynamic in terms of just feeling like you're in lockstep with your, with the people that you're sharing your own home with, kind of thing. So those are the trends that I've seen.
So I also find it really fascinating that there's so many new businesses and ideas that have really developed during the pandemic. And I think the hyper efficiency that you mentioned about building out the infrastructure that you talked about will be very interesting. And I think the future of all this innovation will be something that really will affect like the workforce in the future, and also affect and change like what I guess the new norm of doing business is. So just to build off of that question, how do you think businesses and policymakers can prepare for the future of work and this new norm?
That's a loaded question. And so we could look at it in different ways. And so if we think about the policymakers when it comes to just the infrastructure and the availability of, of people having access to the internet, to those types of tools that are needed for them to do their work, that's where the policymakers could really help. And I mean, we've all seen the issues, especially when a lot of schools went remotely. Those of us that could afford, then, the kids were fine and could work out of their home and do everything. But then there were lots of kids that could not afford. And that's where the policymakers could really help and work with the corporations to try to ensure that there is, that it's parity, that it's fair across the board for everyone, going forward. There's a lot with respect to policy also when it comes to job training for the future, because we have really just changed the world on what the needs are going forward. We've automated so much now that a lot of the lower level jobs have basically disappeared. And I mean, China, like it's one place that, I mean, if you look at what's happening over there, how much automation has been put in place and what needs to kind of happen, going forward, the US, UK, Germany, China, like all these places need to kind of rethink, like, how are we going to train this workforce in a much faster way for the future? And these are things that we talked about years ago and we were kind of dragging our feet. But now between the policymakers and the corporations and the nonprofits, like we got to work to figure out how are we going to transform this new workforce going forward. It's a much more higher level workforce, that's needed going forward, very, kind of intellectual curious and who can make it in that workforce. And then we have the other thing that's kind of happening, and this isn't really policy, this is corporations within their policy themselves. It's like, are we going to continue to be degree snobs, as we do our hiring, or are we going to do things differently with respect to how we hire the workforce for the future? And do people have to have a 4-year degree going forward, or is there something else that we're thinking about? This is actually a topic I could probably talk on forever, so I'll let Stacy and Laura jump in, and I'll probably jump in again because education is extremely important to me, and how we educate people and how we meet them at their needs to ensure that we have the workforce that we need going forward. It's extremely important to me.
I join in that. I think one of the things you said, Georgette, like it struck me this week, and I saw it as a news story. It didn't, for me, receive as much attention as I would have expected, but I think it was earth shaking when you understood what happened, which was the FCC announced a subsidy of $50 a month for broadband service and for low-income families, and $100 for to basically purchase computing. If that isn't policy jumping in to say you can't be in this workforce unless you have those digital tools, I don't know what is. So that really floored me, and I agree completely with Georgette that that's something that the policymakers not only should be really have to keep us competitive now that we are in that more digital age. Other things that I've thought about from them, like what more business makers can do around the policy work. I'm a huge data geek and nerd. I love data. And it's been interesting to watch some of the changes happening now that we're all fully remote and we're all working the way that we are. There are tools like, and I'm not promoting it, it's just the one that I've seen most recently, like Microsoft Workplace Analytics. They're doing a scrape of data, anonymized, and they can only do it in North America, where they look at workers, how you're using their tools and how they interact. So for example, for the meetings that all of your employees on, how many emails are being sent during meetings? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that multitasking, or is that people not actually attending the meeting? Okay, you have X amount of hours in collaboration. How much time do you have for focus? Some of the things I think are interesting. Okay, how many of the meetings, because they can do this, how many of the meetings have 3 levels of managers in the same meeting? So I really think that data is what business should be using to look at how their operating models are. They have more of it than ever because we're fully remote and everything can be done. Yes, I do think about the privacy concerns of this kind of information, but when it comes to how businesses can manage it, it's leveraging those tools, leveraging digital collaboration tools, I think is another one. I'm hearing a lot about, whether it be whiteboard or mural, but there's a lot of tools that companies can use to try to recreate the same collaboration, even though we're remote. So I think that it's going to be lots of different ways to leveraging the digital to help us out of this space. I mean, if COVID had happened before WebEx and Zoom, it would have been a very, very different story. So, that was one thing that's actually interesting. That was one major change, and I think businesses have come to embrace it, of ways that they're uniting employees during this time, is the video conferencing. I mean, it was almost never on when we all had video conferencing, and now it is ubiquitous. It is different when you are not choosing to share. And I think for me, who runs a team of people, I say to my team, it's your choice. I certainly, to the extent that you are comfortable, I want to see everybody. This is how we're still staying connected despite this. And it really does make a big difference. So that's my thoughts on kind of pivoting to this future model.
My thoughts on, how public, policy can help. There are 2 things. One, I completely agree with like what I would call equitable internet, making sure that from 2 to 100, you have access to the internet, and you also have the infrastructure in your own neighborhood to make sure that you have access to that in an equitable way. And I think there have been some really amazing tech partners that have jumped in on that, in California and some other states. The other thing that I would like to mention are healthcare public policy initiatives. So we've definitely seen, in the United States, government working to get vaccines, approved very quickly, emergency supply chains, this sort of thing. So I think, in the end, the only way we can be a productive workforce is to have a very healthy and happy workforce. And that requires, a public policy to support, access to healthcare and vaccines and other tools to help people stay healthy and well. And maybe, in insurance as well.
Yeah, I think Laura makes a good point because telemedicine became very huge during the pandemic, and I don't think telemedicine I don't think it should go away. I think it has made it easier, especially for the elderly, to be actually stay in their home and not have to travel out and things like that. But I also wanted to raise another one, with respect to policy that we need to think about. And no offense to all the men that are actually on this call also, but when it comes to the pandemic, women were, a lot of women stepped out of the workforce, and that's a choice because of their family to actually do the remote home from school. And I'm hoping that there's some good policy that comes in play with the companies to figure out re-entry for women back into the workforce after this. It's the numbers have dropped greatly for the number of women that stepped away, and my kids are older, but if they were younger, I would probably have to make a decision like that also. But it's something we have to think about to try to, make sure we continue to kind of keep women in the workforce going forward.
I'll jump on that one for half a second, George, but it's been staggering, the numbers of the women stepping out of the workforce, and it is a choice. And I'm sure you and I could have a wonderful long conversation of how that choice plays out, because sometimes it is, earnings versus a respective between gender roles sometimes is not equitable, and so therefore plays into the role, and traditional roles playing into it as well. And maybe I definitely come from, I work full time, but my husband's with our children, and so I think sometimes I definitely see some of these gender issues, from lots of different angles. But I definitely agree that that is something that the firm should be really, and it doesn't have to be gender specific, but we are now asking to juggle work and our family care responsibilities at the same time. And for my firm, a couple things that they did to try to really support families in that way. One was they had special leave where, like, I just need leave to be able to, on these days, help my kids through school. And they said they kind of developed a special category of leave that they could support workers who were really trying to do that tough juggle of full-time parent, full-time worker. And then second was that they also really emphasized to the managers, you just need to go to flex scheduling. Like, you need to stop thinking about 8 to 2 as your prime hours, because that may be when the parent really needs to help their child be in school.
Right.
Work getting done doesn't matter if it's at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. God forbid, they don't want people that, but if flexibility is really the key to help that. So I think it's something that companies as well as policymakers should be looking at, is supporting the family as a unit as they go through their working environment.
Right. And we're on such a hot topic right now when it comes to that piece. The other piece that we have to think about with respect to policy going forward is around mental illness. It has increased drastically through this pandemic, especially with our younger, children, and what are going to be the ramifications going forward, that how this has impacted them going into the future. So there's just, there's a lot, and that goes along with Laura's whole medical, thought process there, but there's a lot to think about here. And we don't know, we don't know what we don't know right now on what the impacts could be for the future.
One other thing I was thinking about, that this is, I guess we've been presented with an opportunity to think about the way we do business differently. And what I mean by that is, in terms of dealing with major issues such as climatization changes, we can think about, how can we operate our business differently? And our eyes have really been opened in terms of, do we really need to, lease out these major buildings? Do we need to travel as much? Do we need to do this? All of these things that, cause us to consume. And, I know for sure my lifestyle has been greatly simplified over the last year. And that was kind of forced upon me. I didn't really choose that. But if I think about the benefits of it, it actually feels good in terms of, changing our lifestyle in ways that are maybe more, it's maybe more traditional or less consumeristic, so hopefully I've decreased my carbon footprint, and the companies that we work with have decreased their carbon footprint, and we can learn from this, and maybe take that forward when we think about when we're out of the pandemic, how we can still continue to benefit the environment and take care of our world that way.
Right. Yeah, we hope we don't go back and make the same mistakes again.
Yes, exactly.
And I think I'm going on another topic, because I thought a lot about what Stacy said, because I'm a data person also, and and data just informs you of all your next steps. And if we think about just e-commerce in general and what's happened in the retail stores, the restaurants, the new point of service systems, the amount of data that's being collected around Buffalo Wild Wings, and how many people are actually, online doing things that way. I mean, I think that that's going to stay. Like, there are some things that will go back to a hybrid or a normal, but I think the way that we have evolved with respect to e-commerce is here to stay, definitely, and we will continue to evolve going forward. The self-checkouts, at the Walmarts, at the Targets, at the at the supermarkets. I mean, a lot of that will continue, to grow, and we'll see what happens with the whole banking systems. I mean, more people were going to ATMs and into other systems that were put in place so that they could digitally put checks in the bank and things like that. Will we evolve, and where are we going to go with the whole blockchain technology and things like that going into the future? So I mean, e-commerce is going to continue to change, going forward. I don't see us going back from that. The way that we are looking at our processes for efficiency with respect to robotics processing automation, and really trying to, especially operational areas across big banks, across areas, I think that will continue, because everyone's trying to drive for that efficiency. But as these things continue to drive for the efficiency, we also have to think what happens to the person. And that was our prior topic that we were talking about, what happens to reskilling and retooling people, and how are the policymakers and the corporations going to work together to kind of do that for the future.
Yeah, I think that reskilling is so critical, and how do we get our youth also that are going to be all graduating into this economy? How do we get them all to work and develop and grow? That's critically important. But the jobs will continue to evolve, and some people just don't want to work in a high-tech environment. So it'll be interesting to see how the mix of where all the jobs go after this.
Something that, it's a great point, Lauren, kind of how State Street has reacted to it. We've been in the process for years, and this is all stuff I'm not telling you anything that's not in the public sphere, but we've been in the process of transforming as a business as we do make that pivot more towards the digital and the front to back solutions that we've announced. And so they looked at that and said, we're going to massively move around our workforce. And in the past, we would have, there would have been a lot of layoffs, but hiring at the same time. And State Street took a very proactive approach. When the COVID first hit, they said, boom, we will not do any layoffs in 2020. Full stop. They said it I think in April, maybe. So that and they literally said, we want to give our employees security during this tough time. Performance-based, decisions is a different matter if you had somebody who was, abject and working, but no layoffs. They had already had plans to do that. So they had to get creative, and they announced that they had developed what they refer to as the talent marketplace. They still are making these major business changes, but instead the staff goes into this talent, people whose jobs have now been, that are no longer required, the roles have been eliminated. They move into this talent marketplace where they go through intense retraining. And there's a pairing process to move them to the new opportunities in the bank, even though it's going to be something where they're going to have to be recast. But State Street very much seeing the value of its staff and wanting to hang on to that staffing and develop them rather than lose that kind of institutional knowledge and that kind of experience, and paying, consistently having to bring in new people, they just feel the real loss in productivity. So this dovetailed off of what Laura was saying, because as part of that, they've really engaged a lot of learning tools that in leveraging that digital technology as well, a lot of stuff using AI and looking at employees' ability, like, coming in and saying, okay, here's what I do, here's what I know, here's maybe where I want to go, but then the AI will consistently be making recommendations, and you're searching for training on there. It's not just a defined catalog, it goes out to what is also available broader. So it's like Netflix. It's literally both giving you a wide range of selections, but also making recommendations based on who you are and what you've done. So I think it's from State Street's model, I'm seeing them embracing that retooling and retraining of folks and leveraging the digital tools that can help us do that in the best way, rather than just treating it like you just need to automatically find a person who has what you need and hiring them from the market.
No, I mean, Stacey, that's really good to hear that Stacey's doing that, because I mean, the major companies need to do that. That's the only way we're going to gotta really get the workforce going. And then we can't forget also, the big need for, the plumbers, the HVAC, those types of skills also. Like we can't, like that's a huge need. Like right now, I think in Texas, because of the issues from the ice storm, they're backed up 3 months for plumbers and things like that. So like we cannot forget that need also. And how do we ensure that we are getting people into vocational schools to learn these trades, and how are we making it easier for the apprenticeships that they have to go through and things like that. So, I mean, we all are dealing in our corporate world, and we know how important digital and, the leverage of technology is for the companies, but there's also this whole, vocational side of the basic skills that are needed for people. So there's stuff there. We just have to figure out how do we work together to train people to get them there.
Thank you so much for your answers and your discussion. I think the points about education, healthcare, and technology, whether it's the equitable internet or it's the new piece that Stacey mentioned about providing subsidies for broadband, or the exponential growth of telehealth utilization, and what you guys were just talking about the changing in the workforce and adapting it with all the current changes, are quite insightful. And I think this conversation was probably very insightful for our audience. So just to build off of that question, so given the fundamental changes to a business's operating models, in addition to its working dynamics, how can firms enable workers to reskill for the future? And how can they ensure that this change is in a way that fits the purpose or fit for the tasks that are expected of them, given the new norm of doing business?
So I think Stacey probably spoke to a lot of that with respect to State Street and what they're doing internally. And I've also read that Jeff Bezos is doing a lot in Amazon also to, he was at a point, and it's interesting how people have evolved also. And we could probably talk about this, about different CEOs, because there's a soft skill that people have gained through COVID, through this pandemic, that they didn't have before. And I've seen it with a lot of CEOs that I work with in general, that they had to put themselves in the shoes of their employees and really kind of understand, how am I going to deal with them going forward? And, years ago, like Basil, I think he made some comments, years ago, just around the fact that, people may have to have kind of social welfare checks because the automation is going to put them out of work. But he's changed through this whole thing, and he's been trying to figure out, how do I retrain my own employees also in Amazon to kind of keep them going. But I think what Stacey said, like State Street, I think most of the larger companies are trying to rethink that and how they do it. I belong to a nonprofit called Year Up, which is an excellent nonprofit for taking underprivileged kids and trying to get them into corporate offices. Especially Stacey, Year Up hires a lot. State Street hires a lot of Year Up youth in their operations areas. But you also see now, like the Facebook and the Twitters, they're building Year Up campuses on their campus and taking these youth and training them. And these kids are now, getting great jobs, in excellent technical companies going forward. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think we're going to see a lot more partnerships with a lot of the nonprofits to kind of help this move forward.
I personally have definitely changed. I was started to mention earlier how I've had to evolve my style to coach and train. And I coach and train a lot of my clients too on, how they speak to the market. And one of the things that I've noticed, or that's been very helpful to me, is the sharing basically online through, as Stacy was mentioning, have your camera on, do the Zoom, have as much contact as you can. But also it's enabled us to, I can kind of set things all up on my computer to share this, talk through that. And it's really helped facilitate a lot of conversation. So that, it's really just trying to figure out how in a two-dimensional way to continue to train and develop and coach and align. And so that's one of the things that I've done.
I jump on that, Laura, to say that's kind of a challenge to this audience, which is like, it's going to be different, that you're going to own individually your networking and your development, and probably largely remotely. And I mentor a lot of people, and I really tell them, like, what are you doing? Are you randomly setting meetings with people who you want to develop relationships? Are you looking, I believe, I know we're going off pandemic topic entirely, but I strongly believe in mentoring. I believe every person, if you think about it, you individually are the worst possible person to make decisions about your career, because you're always trying to do something you've never done before. You need good guidance, and not just one mentor, you need several. I think this remote environment we are in is going to make that really essential, if it wasn't already. And what you're saying there, Laura, about how you find ways to connect with people, even though you're not in the same room, is going to be instrumental to that. So I know that's slightly off topic, but I think for this group, just understanding that a little more is going to be asked for them than was the prior groups that did things more in person. There was a natural development of relationships that they're not going to have as much unless they're intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I agree with you, Stacy. I've been doing a lot of mentoring also with younger people through this. And you're right. You're getting them, like, you have to step out there. You got to reach out to people. You got to create the Zoom meetings with them. And it's a lot more on them now. But they're picking up on it. I mean, people are transitioning. We realize how agile we really are.
Arguably the more comfortable in the digital connection. It took all of us geezers, or at least me geezer, to get used to having a WebEx on all the time. But now I really do enjoy it. So yeah, no, hopefully it'll be easy pickup.
And the tools are out there for people to network. I mean, so many tools, just between LinkedIn and that's one of the best tools for sure. But I've also joined, networks, between Chief and Athena, and, there are groups that you can join and have these collaborative conversations. I know a lot of people have been talking about Clubhouse. I haven't signed up for Clubhouse yet, but I hear it's pretty cool. And I think I was invited to Lunchbox, or, so there are all these like digital online networking opportunities. That said, I did attend a venture capital conference. I won't say which one earlier this week, that there was a technical glitch, and the whole thing was it was like, it could have been so good, like we had a conference in November that was like brilliant, and it just was awesome. And then the one, for whatever reason, they were having massive technical issues, and that just kind of ruined it. But that doesn't mean give up.
Yes, and I think you just sparked something in my head around the mentoring and and the reaching out. It's also going to take the more seasoned professionals in the management suite to realize, when it comes to promotions and things like that, you got to think about it differently. It's not the person that's in your face all the time. So you're really looking at the skill sets and what they're doing and how they're adding value. And so it's going to be different for a lot of people, as they think about how we build that succession planning of people going forward, especially if firms stay in a hybrid or a total remote environment.
Yeah.
This is what she preaches. She reached out to me on LinkedIn before I even knew we were on a panel together.
I did.
She is doing this. So you very much walk the walk there. But I think it's something that I agree with the others, is that, it's going to be so commonplace. It will seem strange that we didn't do things. I do, Georgette, couldn't agree with you more. I hope that that's one of the benefits of this, is we're no longer defaulting to the people who are closest, and when it comes to promotion and advancement and development. And that's something that, just from my seat, we're doing. And it's a wonderful thing where we're developing a whole program around skip level meetings, where we're going to the senior managers, having them raise their hand and say, I will do it. And then you go 2-3 levels down in the organization, so that you're having people getting development and contact early on, which they, it's all a function, I think, of being remote, that we can kind of take advantage of this opportunity to push this kind of program.
Yes, I did read an interesting article in the Financial Times not too long ago about when we do go back to work, that the projection is that more men will be in the office and more women will be working from their home office. And this is, based on surveys and things like that. And so what the article is kind of pointing to is that going to, make all the progress that women have made, so to speak, in terms of getting promoted and equitable pay and so on, more challenging, because they won't be in person as often as maybe the men will be.
Scares me, Laura. It scares me. And I say that just because, like I said, I intentionally made a choice to not take a job because I was only in the office a couple of days a week, because I thought that was a competitive disadvantage, especially that was when I made the pivot out of the U.S. Attorney's Office into State Street. And because I knew I was making a pivot, it was incredibly important connection. And so I worry that what the effect of that can be when you have half in the office, half not.
Right. It's definitely going to be, yeah, it's, some offices are saying that they're going to require mandatory, 2 days in the office or 1 day in the office. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how everybody, gets back to work, so to speak. But I think from a productivity standpoint, there's no question that workforce has been very, very productive, hyper productive, I think. But that advancement and promotions will have to really be mindful and make sure that women don't sort of slide back, relative to men, in terms of promotion and advancement.
You've also seen, if you look at just the structures, you've seen a lot of management get cut out due to the pandemic, and realizing that they flattened the organizations more, and so that's been very interesting to watch also.
So I think building off of all these questions and all these points you guys made, one that really stood out to me was when you guys were talking about advice that you had for students, and just given the scope of our audience, I think they would really appreciate you three touching up a little more on that. So other than networking and being proactive, is there any more advice you have for students right out of graduation, navigating the workforce, given the new setup, everything with technology, etc.? Do you have any advice?
So I always tell students, because I've been in a tech world my whole life, that most students who are coming out with STEM degrees, they really should have jobs by now if they're graduating from college, coming up soon, because there are a lot of open positions if you have a STEM degree. That should not be an excuse at all. But a lot of my mentoring is really for people to figure out, to stay intellectually curious, as they're coming out, but also to really figure out how you're adding value on a daily basis. Like, that is the big thing. You got to figure out, what am I doing that's actually adding value to what this organization is doing, what this company's doing, whatever it's doing. You have to be a value add. And that's just, a big thing that I leave with students all the time, thinking about that, thinking about the conversations of the people that you need to be speaking with, to ensure that you're not sitting in complacency, but you continue to learn and grow and move forward in that way.
One of the things I would advise students to try to balance their life if they can. That's one, overarching thing, that, life can't only be about work. And, you can, you can spend hours and hours and hours, doing something, and it may not totally fulfill you. It probably won't totally fulfill you. But if you can have things on the side, start your own little business or little hobbies, or, friends and family, that's what I would advise for your own happiness and personal health and well-being, that you should try, if you can, to have balance in life.
Good advice. I think since it sounds like we're a little bit of free form, that we can go over. I think my advice has to do with just being really open. I remember reading when I was coming out, I can't remember if I was undergrad or law school, but it was like saying that my generation would have 3 careers, and I laughed. I had grown up in a very different mold, and now here I am, and I get them the 20 years in me, and I'm pretty sure I've got at least one more career in me. And I know it's non-traditional. Somebody looks at my resume and they have to see that I'm an athlete, and they have to be willing to buy that. And so what I say to people all the time that I mentor is, this is no longer I'm on a career and developing that career. You now need to see yourself, I hate to say it, like a commodity. And what you're trying to do is expand the skills and breadth and depth that you bring to it, and your ability to operate in different spaces. I think that fits the world we are in now. It's no longer a linear, singularized, or siloed conversations. Everything is about connecting the dots. And your ability to see with a broader vision is now an asset. So I'm very lucky that I have that intellectual curiosity. I have a litigator's curse that I want a different case on a different day and learn a different field. But I really do tell people that are now entering the workforce is, look at, number one, treating yourself as just something you're investing in, and you want to broaden that to keep it so that you can have the most, not only the most opportunity, but also the most value add to the conversation, if you're not just one tool in the toolbox. And the other thing I tell them, and this is definitely something that I have lived, is look at the macro factors of the economy. If somebody comes to me now and says they want to go to work for Staples, I look at them like they have 3 heads. Like, what is happening in the bigger world, and are your goals aligning to that? I'm sorry, there's not a besmirch of Staples, and they're going to, I'm sure, reinvent themselves 10 ways. I'm just more talking about if people are threading themselves to industries that are not in the moment positioned into the future, you could really be hurting yourself. So if you look at my past, I was a psych major who became, joined telecom and installed internet systems in Africa and the Middle East. 0 qualifications for that, but the economy, that's what was hiring, was telecom. I went to law school, and I went to law firms and then in-house during the 2008, and it wasn't intentional, but I happened to be prosecuting at that time, so I was largely unaffected by the economy shrinkage. I came out, and of course we're post all of the 2008 financial crisis, and I'm getting a job in regulatory oversight of financial industries. I mean, so my career is partially of my own development, my own capabilities, but it's very much that I embrace macro factors and embrace the larger movements in the economies that I can, best position myself for. So it's a very different way to think about your career and how you develop skills for that career, as opposed to something that is very linear.
There's one other piece of advice that I always give students, and for any of those students that are listening to me that have heard me before, because I've been guest lecturing for 7 years, this is one thing that I always say: credibility is paramount. It's the biggest asset you have, and that you can continue to build on. It's portable. It goes with you from job to job to job. So you will be asked in your career to do something that you don't want to do, that you think is wrong. You will, you will maybe get fired. You will have to quit. You will have to change jobs. That's okay, and that's part of the process. But in the end, your integrity, your personal integrity, your own compass, and your own light is what you have to listen to most, and let it guide you.
Yep, integrity is key.
Sometimes the biggest thing about credibility is saying, I don't know. is really stating that you'll find out, you'll chase it down, you'll ask wherever you need to, but not trying to, project yourself into spaces you can't operate with authority. It does just as much for your credibility as, giving the right answer at the right time.
So authenticity and integrity are very key.
Gee, I don't know what we ladies, I'm having fun, but this, I don't know if this has anything to do with the pandemic.
We went off that. Hey, the pandemic has also, it's just made us all think a lot,
Right.
Yeah.
This is how you're resilient. This is how
You'll see both more divorces and more marriages. People make major life decisions because they are getting that bigger perspective. Quite often you do see massive career changes. So you're not wrong, Georgette, they are related, though maybe not directly.
Well, thank you all for your really invaluable advice. I'm sure for everyone on this call that's a student that's kind of looking for advice, going to the workforce and a little anxious about that, I'm sure what you guys have given is a piece of advice that they'll carry with them throughout their career. And right now we're hitting right about 11. So in respect for your time, we'll probably end it here unless we receive any more questions from the audience. But thank you everyone for attending our summit today. And once again, thank you for our 3 speakers for your valuable time and your advice and your answers. They've been really provoked a lot of thought and they've been really insightful and I really appreciate it. So we hope to see you all at the rest of our GCC Global Summit panels, but feel free to leave any questions in the chat, but we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've had fun. Bye, everyone.
Bye.